Hey everybody, happy Monday. I have a really intriguing topic today around digital signage in the enterprise, screens that communicate. Mark, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. And yeah, hello everyone from London.
Well, thanks for being here. And not an area I know a lot about, but I do know a lot about the enterprise where you're really getting so much traction and interest. Before that, maybe introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and the big idea behind ScreenCloud.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent my whole career in technology, which is now well over 20 years. So got into the workforce around the year 2000, and really me and my co-founder Luke, we're both kind of, I suppose, the original children of the internet era, where we learned to code in the 90s when we were teenagers, and we've always worked with web technology our whole lives. So we actually started a business together in 2004. And it was a design and build agency building websites, apps, and eventually mobile products for customers in Britain mainly. And then we invested in ourselves from the profit of the agency, and basically did a load of side projects, some SaaS, mobile products, that kind of thing. ScreenCloud was one of those side projects that came around in 2014 and showed the greatest potential to be big. So we decided to divest ourselves of the agency and the other things that we had, and go all in on ScreenCloud in 2015. And really, we've been growing the business ever since. So I'd say we're not a startup anymore. We're a scale up now. We're at scale up kind of size. And we started more kind of basically being a digital signage platform, trying to open up the market to people who weren't using screens that much before. So the kind of early wave that we got on top of was, what would web developers do in the audio visual industry if we could bring our skills to market? And at the time, we had products like Amazon Fire TV were just coming out. So we had this consumer hardware and like Android TV and things like that, where basically regular people with regular screens could
Mm.
now put web technology on those screens. So we jumped on that wave, and rather than go through like reseller channel, we went direct via our website. So people could do a free trial, credit card transaction, kind of low cost CapEx, and basically start using screens where previously the market had kind of priced them out. And then we sort of went on that journey at the beginning, not really caring too much about the use case, because from a technical point of view, a file is a file. So a JPEG, an MP4, or a web page on a
Mm.
screen, it doesn't really matter what it says. The technology to push it there and reliably keep it there is like universal. So we didn't really care about use case. And we got thousands of customers that way, but quite small ACVs. And then as we matured and as the platform evolved and grew, we switched more into like an enterprise offering, although we still have our self-serve offering as well. And obviously for enterprises, you're more than familiar, you need to kind of start to get really specialist in what you do. So we saw a really interesting opportunity using screens as a communication platform rather than as a sales platform, which is how most people encounter screens in their daily life. And particularly in those large enterprises with many locations and thousands of deskless or frontline workers, where they weren't getting any digital communication via like email, intranet, etc. And the
Mm.
screen seemed the most natural thing to replace the notice board with bits of paper and stuff stuck to it, or word of mouth, and to actually open up that digital channel in those environments. And we've been specializing there for the last few years, and we're getting pretty good at it now, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so intriguing. And with digital signage, seeing is believing. So let's take
Absolutely.
a look at a video on your from your YouTube page, kind of on the big idea here. Let's take a look.
ScreenCloud is the most modern, user-friendly, and highly rated digital signage solution in the world. Our 9,000 plus customers deploy global networks of screens and use them to communicate from anywhere using our cloud-based technology. Our intuitive user interface makes it easy for your organization to get set up and start communicating with screens. Create beautiful content quickly and easily, and seamlessly integrate the tools you already use, such as Microsoft Teams, Tableau, Zoom, and much more. With smart scheduling, we'll make sure you communicate the right messages at the right time to the right audience. Our technology is at the forefront of digital signage, designed and built with the highest security standards in mind. And our cloud infrastructure gives you the flexibility to scale with your organization as you grow and your needs evolve. Speak to us or sign up for a free trial today.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So Tell me about the impact, both on customers. Obviously, sales and marketing use cases are everywhere, but also more interesting for me, I think, is internal communications. Employee experience, and how did you discover that was an important use case?
Yeah, well, I'll start there because I think that's super interesting. And actually, we've got our first ever customer conference next week in Charlotte, where
Oh,
we have
wow.
one of our US offices, and we've actually basing the entire conference around communicating to deskless workers in the era of AI, and obviously with a heavy emphasis on how we use screen technology to do that. Now, I suppose you could argue anyone watching this would be like what right does these British people, right? Because we're based in Britain, we're also based in Thailand. Like we've been software engineers since we were kids. Why am I in North and South Carolina, in manufacturing plants, communicating to deskless and frontline workers? Like, how does that even marry up? There's no logic to it. And the reality is that it's a marriage of the internet, I suppose. The fact is that there were, we sell into IT. So our real customer is IT directors and CIOs because we're part of the IT infrastructure in the same way that the phone and the laptop are as well. And so ultimately we're an IT platform, although the content doesn't necessarily come from IT, but the actual kind of underlying infrastructure and CapEx is all very much from IT. And I guess, this became acutely obvious to us during COVID when a lot of the other places that were using ScreenCloud were shut down, that actually the supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, et cetera, healthcare, and the list goes on. They didn't shut down, and communication became ever more important. Now, for those of us that were lucky enough to work from home during that unsafe period, we were given an abundance of tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, Zoom, whatever it might be.
Mm.
Almost too many tools, you might argue, a little bit too much noise. But what about the people actually in these other environments? Predominantly they're getting most of their updates inconsistently via word of mouth. And again, there could be 24/7 shifts. It doesn't mean that the manager's doing a poor job, but is everyone getting the same message? And what happens if that message changes, especially in an uncertain period? I think also as a society, we've started to see that really, the the world collapses if the supply chain and all of these people who are working, to build these products and get these products shipped to our doors, like it's somewhat important. And I think we're seeing a greater emphasis on the need for these people to be well paid, to be well informed and looked after. And you've got a majority millennial workforce now who are not really putting up with having terrible communication from a 1970s technology, which is basically paper printed out on a notice board, especially if that's data. Because, that might be a spreadsheet that got emailed to a line manager, but that's out of date by the time it's put up on the notice board, if it even gets switched out at all. So I suppose the argument I'm making here is for the use case for screens to be used way more predominantly in these environments. And then ultimately ScreenCloud's job is to try and make that as reliable and simple and straightforward as possible for those customers, and to try and automate as much of the heavy lifting as we can. And we tend to do that with integrations, but by basically taking a web developer centered approach and trying to move away from thinking of this as bits of content and media, which is kind of more the retail experience where you're seeing images and videos like looping around. That's fine for a customer in the Apple store, but not if you're looking at screen 20, 30 times a day, trying to make decisions based on your environment. That needs to be data driven. Therefore, it needs to be web driven to be a source of truth.
Amazing. And I'm just thinking of so many use cases in my own mind, from like that manufacturing floor you mentioned to hospitals and healthcare settings to retail. But tell me, what are the big use cases in different
Yeah.
industries you're seeing most traction in?
Well, what I enjoy so much about conversations like this, and thank you for your sort of open-minded questions as well, because it's really helpful, is that nothing I'm going to tell you is nothing that you probably couldn't have already figured out for yourself, but it's like a penny drop style moment, because it's all become so obvious, but then sometimes we just don't look at it with a fresh lens. But you're right. So firstly, if you think of just deskless workers, it actually is 80% of the active workforce globally is considered deskless. So that is everything from, think of all the people working in construction, in retail, in hospitality, in healthcare, logistics, manufacturing, transportation. It goes on and on and on. What you have to realize is that me and you, we're the minority. The people sat on a computer all day, we're only 20%. Most people are out there in the world doing stuff. and we need them to do that. And the tools that we're so familiar with, they just don't have access to them, and it's not even really appropriate in those environments. A lot of those people are also on contracts rather than fully onboarded employees, so they don't come into the IT infrastructure naturally. They don't have an IT login. About 5 to 10% typically have an IT login, and they don't have an email address unless it's their personal one. And likewise, their device is likely to be their own device rather than a company one. So it has a whole heap of security issues. So the first thing for us to understand is that the tools that we would naturally gravitate towards, they just don't have access to, or they're not appropriate. The second part of your question, I think, was around use case around the content. And this is also where it's kind of complicated. We might be selling to IT, but the end user is typically not IT. So when it comes to internal communications, there's basically 4 buckets, of which there's many, many subgenres in each bucket. But bucket 1 would be employee engagement, which is normally in these environments can be quite low employee engagement scores because people just feel a bit in the dark, a bit taken for granted. They don't really hear much. And what they do hear feels a bit like corporate propaganda often. And often it's kind of not actually intended in such a way, but it is received in that way. But likewise, they want to know about management training opportunities. They want to hear about new joiners to the team, praise, anniversaries, basically celebrating the team, celebrating what's going on, and showing opportunities for growth within the organization. And then it's things like benefits, enrollment, and everything to do with your employee experience. That's a big bucket. Second bucket, we would call more like functional communication. Now, a big part of this bucket is health and safety, right? Because these are obviously can be dangerous environments. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of machinery, things like that happening. Health and safety is first and foremost, probably the most important things. But then there's that more kind of standard information, such as what's the rota for deliveries today? Is there been any disruption to that? Who's the shift manager? What do I do if? Wayfinding, and then emergency alerts. So basically, if there is like a CO2 leak, how do we do like a takeover of the screens and make sure everyone's safe and that? So that's another big part of this. The third bucket would be productivity information. And by that, I mean dashboards, business intelligence, but basically kind of the data and information you need to see to make judgment calls and maybe course corrections whilst you're in shift and on the job, seeing how you're performing and seeing how things are basically doing. So there's a lot about data visualization going on there. And then we have this kind of fourth bucket, which is, I suppose in many, if it was a form, you'd call it other. We call it game changers. And game changers is usually where we end up doing a bit of bespoke, or you don't call it bespoke in America, custom work, where there's probably some internal system. It might be on a spreadsheet. It might be just something which is very, very unique to that business, that if it was seen on a screen would be just game changing for people in that environment. And normally that's working off like an internal API or process and just visualizing something or some information to people. So basically, yeah, it's a whole range of stuff. Now, because the screen's on all the time, usually, there is a lot of information, real estate, and time to show all of that stuff. So the next most important thing is to consider which audience needs to see what information, not try to fire hose everything to everyone, but to filter it down. So it's a bit more tailored to the audience, but also more tailored to the location the screen's actually in. If this is a break room, maybe it's more the employee engagement stuff. If it's actually out on the floor, maybe it's geared more towards health and safety and productivity, if you kind of get what I mean. And I could go on for about 5 hours with more depth on that. But that's
I'm sure you will next week at your big get-together.
Yeah, I get a chance to, yeah.
That's amazing. So I couldn't help but look at what you're doing in AI and machine learning. Wouldn't be a tech chat if we didn't talk about that. So it sounds like you're getting into the science fiction arena there, but what does that mean for you and your customers? How are you deploying AI today?
Well, we have some very big announcements coming in the next couple of weeks, but I won't steal my co-founder's thunder. But put it this way, he said to me this morning, actually, I'll quote him on this. So Luke Hubbard is like the most technically talented person I ever got to work with my whole career. I was fortunate enough to meet him at a very young age and become friends and collaborate with him. He is genuinely a super mind when it comes to all of these things. And he said to me this morning that he believes the program he's working on now is the last piece of software he'll ever write in his adult life. Wow. And he's 42. He believes, and he goes, I'm going out with a bang. I'm going out with a bang. This is the last time I'll ever need to code again. Everything now will be done via prompting from here on in. So we have something very exciting in the works there. And Luke is not a big one for hyperbole, but there are some very obvious and immediate areas where AI can assist here. The biggest thing with screens is, you can tell I'm a bit of a screen nerd, is that the content that people want to show on a screen to some degree already exists. Most of the problem isn't people sat there going, what should I put on a screen? They know what needs to be seen. The problem is that most of it is formatted not for screen. So if you think of a screen up on the wall, maybe 20 feet away, it needs to be high contrast, very, very simple and very clear that maybe your peripheral vision picks up, right? That isn't how most files are written. They're normally much longer, multiple slides, like a bit more fully fledged, right? The problem is that every single file and every single piece of communication is kind of slightly different. So there's not really any kind of consistent coding rules you could do to translate document A into screen B, except AI can do that, right? Because AI has the ability to understand and gain the inference. And so if you said, take this 5-page PDF internal communication update, but find for me the key points here and break them down into bullet points and multiple slides, and then display that onto screen, QR code to read the full report. AI is like, sure. And I'm like, okay, cool. Actually, in this facility, most people are Spanish as a first language. So can you put that into Spanish for me? No problemo. Off we go, right? You see where I'm going with that? And then you might even say, actually, that summary is a bit long. Could you just shorten that down so that we still understand the core context, but like, it's just too wordy for a screen right now? Yeah, fine. So you can see how AI is going to just easily eat up these kind of challenges. And then the other thing I think will be for taxonomy and categorization. What do you think this piece of content is about? Oh, it's a health and safety piece. It's about this. So we'll be able to get a much more granular understanding of the context of the content. And therefore, we'll be able to more likely do programmatic scheduling where we choose the right information to the right audience at the right time. At the moment, that is all done centrally, and I would say generally pretty poorly. And that's not a bad reflection on my customers. It's hard to sit in an office in Chicago and think about the best time of day in Modesto that this worker should be looking at this sign, before their break, when you're working on an office 9 to 5. Like, that's just too far removed. So why not just let the AI do the heavy lifting for you based on just like observing what's really happening in these environments? So I think the AI story for this is extremely exciting. And I think no one's going to resist it because it's just helpful.
Yeah, well, that's going to be phenomenal to see that in action. When it comes to your customers, without picking a favorite child, do you care to call out any particular customer that we might know and see out there, and describe, the impact you've had on them from an employee or customer standpoint?
We are nothing without our internal champions, right? The reality is that in an IT budget, most IT budgets do not come with a digital signage line item, like pre-baked in the same way that they might have for firewalls, networking, security, email, Outlook, Microsoft Excel. Like, that budget gets pre-written pretty much. Digital signage is something that needs to be fought for, because screen communication, as much as I am an advocate for it, and this is the reason I'm so publicly advocating for it, it isn't a natural line item yet. And I want screens to be considered as important as email, as a communication channel, in the right environment, of course, where it's appropriate, of which is very appropriate in most environments, if I'm honest. Now, I am nothing without my customers. And so we have this persona, right? Internally, he's called Richard. It's actually based on one of my first customers, who actually was called Richard, who's a CIO, who basically champions screens internally and becomes the intrapreneur. I don't know if have you come across that term before? It's kind of an old term,
Yeah.
isn't it? That entrepreneurial spirit inside of organizations. Basically, that person who says, you know what? I looked at our employee engagement, scores, and communications sucked, and we were like getting 10% score. I want to make that better. I'm going to use screens. And that person finds ScreenCloud typically. And so that is, Johnny at Werner Enterprises. That is Neil at SLB, or Schlumberger, as they used to be called. That is like, there's basically another 50 of them. In fact, we've got them all coming to Charlotte next week. So we love these people, and we basically don't exist without them, because without them fighting the corner for the medium, we can't do anything. And we're still at that early stage, unfortunately, which is weird because my dad's about to turn 80 actually this week. It's his 80th birthday. So
Nice.
happy birthday, Dad. He might be watching this. He watches all the LinkedIn stuff.
Well, it's on Facebook as well. Maybe he's there, so hopefully, yes.
Oh yeah, he's there. He's always watching. He was an angel investor in ScreenCloud, so he's also quite proud of it.
Oh, fantastic. Lovely.
But my dad turns 80 on Thursday, and so he obviously grew up in the 1950s. The screen that he saw in my grandparents' home when we eventually got one is not that dissimilar to what I have in my living room today. It's the function of the screen's almost the same. It's the original screen. And yet from a development and web development point of view, the screen has been left in history, like to hardly evolve really that much further. I mean, the actual tech of the screen has got a lot better, but the actual use case, I mean, a phone utility was to ring people. Now the phone is to do almost everything but ring people, to be honest. And you think of the utility of what's happened there, we just haven't innovated enough on screens. So we have our customers to thank for that, and we've still got a lot of work to do, which is why my job is also to kind of get people thinking more about these subjects.
Wonderful. Well, it's so intriguing to hear your energy and enthusiasm. Describe some of the partnerships that you built, because it really is a who's who of the industry. Little unknown players like Microsoft and Google Cloud and others. That must be very gratifying to see an interest from those big tech players.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, partnerships for us, kind of from tech partnerships, falls into two camps. So camp one, I suppose, is like the hardware and just running the screen network. So Google Chrome OS is actually an excellent operating system for screens. They have great devices which you can plug in, like media player devices you can plug in screens from $200 up. Security first. They've got this wonderful thing called Google Chrome Flex, where you can basically take old Intel NUCs and reflash Google Chrome on them and basically repurpose them, so it's really green, and obviously reduces capex. So and their remote device management and security capabilities are second to none. So Google's a phenomenal hardware partner for us. Microsoft is more of a big partner for us on the content side, because every major enterprise customer we have extensively uses Microsoft products, whether it be obviously Office 365, SharePoint, Teams, Viva Engage, Microsoft Power BI dashboards. I mean, the list goes on. And what we're basically doing is taking that content and second lifing it to screen, where Microsoft don't have a natural to screen offering. So if you've done all that hard work in Power BI dashboards, and now you can see that dashboard on a screen, that's great. Same news for SharePoint or Excel. I mean, Excel kind of runs half the world, doesn't it? So Microsoft see us as the ability to take content out of their systems and to expose it to probably parts of the workforce Microsoft doesn't have as much exposure to, which is that deskless frontline worker thing. So you could say, why do people only have to see that content in Teams? It could also go up to a screen. So it's a really good partnership too. And then beyond that, we see ourselves as a vital channel in the employee communication mix. And this is why we have partnered with platforms such as First Up and Unily, who have these more complete employee engagement platforms, and also Awardco around reward and recognition. Awardco is a really good partner as well. And what we're doing there is we're providing like the screen infrastructure to their content channels, so that we can basically make sure that every single employee can see the communications which are flowing through those channels. And so they've been a fantastic partner as well. And ultimately, the way we see ourselves is we don't really want to be the author of content, because there's enough authoring tools out there. Canva is another example of a partner where people are making stuff in Canva. They want to get it straight to screen without having to like download, upload, and all that shenanigans. So we want to be like the pipes, and the glue or the last mile of delivery, or however you might want to say it. But what we don't want to do is stop the people working the way they already work today. Because why introduce more complexity when they already are doing something fine? Let's just step on that and say, okay, and now you can add to screen too. So we see partnerships as a huge part of our growth channel. It's also better for customers because it's less work for them. More automation means more reliable screens as well.
Fantastic. Well, it's so intriguing. Talk a little bit about the culture that you've nurtured and built, cultivated at ScreenCloud. I think you have offices in the U.S., obviously, in the UK, Thailand, is it? I mean, it's quite a diverse and global team.
It
Maybe
certainly
give us
is.
a peek behind the curtain.
So me and Luke have known each other a long time, and he's British, but he actually moved to Thailand in 2004. So we've always had a London and a Thai team in the culture of our business, which is obviously we've been working together for over 20 years in that respect. So we were always, I suppose, we're a bit ahead of our time there, having kind of not like remote, because we've always been hub based. We're not remote. So we do believe in office culture. We believe in being together, especially when you've got multidisciplinary teams. And in screens, there's a lot of moving parts just to the product, let alone servicing the customer. So you really feel that people do need to get together, because one part of it just doesn't solve it well enough. It needs to be a complete stack. Otherwise, it just doesn't really work. So that's why we believe in hubs, and we obviously let people work from home, half the week or more than that. But we also really get people together. We have another engineering team in Belfast in Northern Ireland, which is a really, really strong technical culture, a bit closer to the West from the engineering point of view, so they can interface with our customers who are mostly in America, with 70% US revenue. And then obviously London is HQ, and then we have LA and we have Charlotte as our kind of go-to-market teams in America. And I suppose the culture, I guess, has evolved out of us being a service company originally. So as an agency, designing and building products for customers, we've always had very much a customer-led approach, because to be honest, if you're building apps for customers, like, you need them to sign off, and you do it on budget and do it on time. So you have to be very customer-centric in your way of thinking. But you also have to build an ability to listen to a customer's problem and then design a solution against it, because the customer doesn't come with a fully fleshed out spec. You create the spec with them based on what you're hearing and what their issues are. And typically you're not working necessarily with product people on the other side. So the DNA of the business has always been to listen to what the problem is, and not necessarily to always do what's being asked, because you get into the faster horse thing. Now, most people see screens, as this kind of just a broadcast medium. They don't really think of it in terms of building web apps and stuff like that. That's something that we know we can bring to the party. So it's more important that we get to understand that customer's problem, their world, and also their multiple problems, because there's so many things that we can touch on using the screens, that we've really got to kind of get our heads into their business. So I suppose a part of our culture is to be naturally curious, to have a learning mindset, and to acknowledge the fact that I've never worked in a factory. I'm not from that world. I don't know anything about it. But it also means I don't come with any preconceived notions of what's going on. So when I go and walk the floors with my customer, I'm asking maybe the questions of a 5-year-old, but often the questions of a 5-year-old are the most intriguing ones. And usually the ones where you challenge the status quo. So why do we put bits of paper on a wall when we could possibly have that internet connected? And it kind of flows from there. So I like to think of us as being quite reasonably humble. I think we have humility in the business, and we focus mainly on solving problems for the customer. And as long as we're constantly thinking about them and less about us, I think that we're on the right path to success.
Well, wonderful mission. Thank you so much for sharing all the insights. I've done 900 podcasts, the first one on digital signage. So
there you go.
First
you
is and best.
You're one and done. You met the best. No.
Absolutely.
Very humble,
and
right?
so next week is a big week for you. What's next? What are you looking forward to over the next few months? There must be lots of meetups and shows and events out there that you attend.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I tend to not go so much to the tech events anymore, because again, I didn't find that my customer was there. We work actually quite extensively with Gartner, so we will quite often be at the CIO conferences. There's the big one in Orlando later this year. We actually do the screens for those shows, so we're part of the fabric. But actually, for me, the customer conference, I'm doing my one tech show. I'm going to do SaaStr. It's based in London in there. So that's where I get to see my contemporaries in the SaaS B2B world. But to be honest, I think the most exciting thing coming right now is this paradigm shift for AI, because I think obviously we're in a bit of a hype bubble, talking of Gartner, and we're well into the hype cycle and probably about to come into the trough of disillusionment. I think that's what goes over on the other side of that hump. But the reality is that the greatest minds in tech that I know of and respect they might all have a different kind of feeling about when it's going to happen and to what degree these outcomes look like. But I haven't met anyone who doesn't think this is a paradigm shift, which is probably going to be bigger than what we will have seen in our careers, which was, for me, the big ones were obviously mobile, social, cloud, probably with the two, and then actually just SaaS, even as a business model, was pretty much changed the game in terms of how we developed and built software. But I think AI, it feels like it's not just hype. This isn't going to be a Web3 thing. So I think we should be fortunate. We should feel fortunate that we are getting to work at a time where we're going to go through one of the greatest shifts like ever, and some of us are going to get eaten up. But the thing about technical people and curious people is we always know what's coming, and we course correct and adapt. So I've never been too scared of that, because it never hits you quite that much by surprise. And I think the most important thing is we've got a platform with 10,000 customers on it who could all benefit from AI to become better communicators with screens. And if it's us that gets to unlock that for them over the next few years, that's a great privilege. And so I think that we should be putting as much energy into thinking about that, preparing our customers for that, and guiding them through that if we have the opportunity to. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time, I think, now. I think
very, very, very exciting. And you're in London, one of the few global hubs for AI. So you're right in the thick of it, right in the action there. So congratulations on all the success, and good luck with next week. I'll be watching on Twitter. Thanks for being here, Mark. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for watching. Reach out to ScreenCloud. They have some really educational and interesting content out there. So
I post
checking
on
out.
My LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn, I post extensively about screen strategy and ideas. So if people want to learn more, please connect with me on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, thank you so much for having me and for those really thoughtful questions.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care. Have a great week.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.